Hi there and welcome. Today we're going to recap the final episode, 7 and 8 of Netflix's animated series Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Find out how the season ends as we take you through this awesomely colorful anime based on the original Scott Pilgrim comic book series that's also voiced by the cast of the 2010 cult classic Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Episode 7. We flash back when Scott was taken through the vegan portal. He travels through time with his captor. After a scuffle with the masked man, they crash into future Toronto, where his kidnapper reveals that he's the future 37-year-old Scott. Later, future Scott brings young Scott to a fancy house where he says the 23-year-old asked why his future self brought him to that time, especially when he was in the middle of a fight. Older Scott laughs and reminisces about the League of Evil Exes.
Fighting those exes was the biggest mistake of our entire life.
Because we lost?
No. Because we won.
Older Scott leads him to the VR chamber, showing him pictures from older Scott's past, of which happens after he defeats everyone in the League and marries Ramona. Spoiler alert, they're separated after about 13 years together, and older Scott doesn't want to talk about it. He tells young Scott about his band, the Sex Bomb, but the new one called Poppin' Twinbee, whose members consist of older Scott and Ramona's twin exes, the Catayonigas twins. They even have a new music video out, but young Scott is more intrigued by what he sees in the room, Wallace's old stuff. Just then, the older version of his roommate shows up, bringing iced tea. As usual, Wallace isn't fazed to see two Scotts. They move upstairs where older Wallace makes drinks as they talk. It turns out Wallace's husband works at Nintendo and he funds the luxurious home that they're in. Young Scott is awestruck at the idea of getting every Nintendo game for free, so much so that he needs a drink to recover. He then wonders why his older self is still living with Wallace, which older Scott explains is only temporary as he's figuring out stuff, mostly Ramona stuff. When young Scott asks where Wallace's husband is, old Scott starts teasing him, and an annoyed Wallace shoots back by asking why there's a young Scott in their timeline. Older Scott is flabbergasted, saying that it was Wallace's idea. He's got the twins to make it possible using Robot 01. Young Scott here realizes that he was brought to the future to avoid battling the exes and dating Ramona. His older self initially denies it, but admits that he did it to keep him from Ramona.
See, I used to have a heart. It was right here. Now it's gone because she tore it out. She rollerbladed all over it. Now it's all smushed and broken and covered in rollerblade tracks.
Young Scott thinks that he can work it out, or that he could do a better job in the past with older Scott's help, but his future self insists he wasn't the one who messed up, claiming he was a good husband. He refuses to return young Scott to his timeline unless he agrees to avoid dating Ramona, angrily declaring that it's Ramona that's bad news. He storms off. Wallace describes older Scott's mood as similar to how young Scott was post-Envy breakup, but 10 times worse, as they both cringe. Later, young Scott bumps into Robot 01 and asks to see any old videos of Scott. He watches, using it like a VR headset to check out old memories. Meanwhile, we see future Ramona delivering mail and later arriving home to find Wallace and young Scott in her kitchen. She knew about older Scott's time travel plan, but thought it was a joke. She's unconvinced that old Scott can stop himself from obsessing over her, but in case old Scott managed to erase everything, she had a backup plan. Old young Neil wrote a memoir about their love story.
Scott and Ramona loved each other very, 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 very much.
Which she sent back in time for young Scott to discover. She time travels using rollerblades made with DeLorean parts. Since Scott doesn't read books, Ramona turned the memoir into a screenplay and left it with Neil in the past. She was the mysterious scriptwriter after all. She confesses her plan was misguided, but wanted and needed to try because Scott is the love of her life. While she thinks it ended disastrously, young Scott disagrees and thinks of a different Ramona who never stopped searching for him. Older Ramona smiles fondly and agrees to bring the younger version of her husband home. Back in the present, Scott finishes explaining everything to Ramona and his friends. Older Ramona says hi, takes a couple of pics with her younger version, and leaves. Scott apologizes to Knives for his past actions and admits he shouldn't have dated her. Knives is relieved that he's alive, but also grateful he disappeared as it helped her grow. Later, Ramona and Scott are alone and about to kiss, but a barrier prevents them from doing so, much to their friends' amusement. Ramona guesses that they must have some unfinished business, as Scott gulps, thinking it might mean that he still needs to fight her exes. When Ramona suggests that they track each other down, Knives exclaims that there's a way to gather them all in one place: the theater. On the premiere night of Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Musical, all members of the League show up, as well as Envy Adams and Stacy Pilgrim. Ramona, Scott, and their friends show up too, readying themselves for a big finale fight.
Then it's time for the big finale.
Episode 8. In the season finale, we open at the theater as the show's about to start. As Todd gets his popcorn, Ramona skates in and Scott emerges from her bag, challenging him to a fight. Todd laughs, saying that he isn't interested in fighting for Ramona as he's now obsessed with Wallace, who overheard him and emphasized he's still not interested. A broken-hearted Todd runs away. Suddenly, Matthews enters the foyer singing, and as Scott gears up to fight, Matthews sternly tells him not to, as it's the biggest night of his career, quickly leaving with his entourage. Gordon and Julie arrive next, so Scott asks him about the force field separating him and Ramona. Gordon says that the villain stuff is behind them now, and that he's dating Julie. When Lucas appears, paparazzi ambush him, but Roxy helps repel the ninjas. Scott immediately asks the two about the force field and offers to fight, but they're not interested. They only want to watch the musical. The twins see Scott and tell him that they don't want to fight, especially since their robot told them they're bros in the future. Having ruled out all Ramona's exes, she and Scott are confused.
So it probably wasn't them then. That leaves... Wait, nobody? We've ruled out all my exes.
What the hell? No fights? No kissing? This finale sucks.
Unbeknownst to them, there are tons of explosives hidden above the stage. As they all sit together, Ramona's exes tease Scott for getting the girl but being unable to kiss her. Meanwhile, Matthew gives a grand performance. Then we see Gordon holding a remote and about to push its button when a bright red light envelops the audience. Scott, Ramona, and their friends in the League find themselves in a space subway. Matthew wants to get back to his performance immediately, and that's when Gordon and Julie reveal that they've rigged the stage with dynamite. It's revenge on Matthew for taking everything from Gordon. But before anyone can argue, someone else appears. It's an even older Scott. He punches young Scott, enraged that he didn't stay away from Ramona. When they fight, Ramona defends young Scott, and they realize that the old man is behind the force field keeping them from kissing. Back in the future, old Scott laced young Scott's drink with nanomachines coded to Ramona's DNA as a backup plan. But the bitter old man says his efforts were useless as he still ended up marrying Ramona, so he intends to end young Scott permanently. As he strikes, Gideon interrupts, asking even older Scott to send them back as they have no beef with him. The muscular, white-haired Scott refuses and attacks Gideon instead. He starts telling his story. After young Scott left the future and old Wallace kicked him out, he trained in a room for 10 years, intending to end everything in a fight against the world.
Me versus the world! I have to destroy all of you!
Even older Scott Pilgrim versus everyone. Fight!
A spectacular battle erupts, but the old man's strength overwhelms all his opponents, defeating even the whole League of Evil Exes. In a vicious attack, even older Scott sends everyone except his younger self and Ramona back to the real world, to their surprise. Now alone with the villain, the couple team up against him, but he quickly recovers. The two Scotts fight.
You need to let me live my life! If I do, you'll end up where I ended up, alone!
Ramona starts to doubt not wanting to date a guy who'd turn into a monster in the future. Suddenly, an even older Ramona appears, confronting her husband about his lack of contact.
10 years. 10 years! Not even a text? Then Wallace tells me you're training to go back in time and fight yourself?
She points out him training to fight the world when he could have been fighting for their relationship. She admits that she still loved him, but when he asks if they can get back together, she refuses. Seeing the older two, younger Ramona asks if we should give up, which her older self answers by asking if it'd be a surprise. Even older Scott points out that they're running away again from the one thing that they love. This makes young Ramona remember what she's always done to her exes and decides she's done running. She hugs her future self, saying she chooses her. The two merge, becoming Super Ramona, calling even older Scott a mess, but acknowledging it's never too late to clean up. She sends older Scott back home. She realizes that the Ramona who left him and the Ramona who just met him are the same. She breaks the force field and the couple finally kiss.
I love you, Scott. And I run away from the thing that I love. But what I've done in the past doesn't have to define me. Help me keep remembering that, okay?
Back in the real world, Matthew successfully finishes the play and everyone applauds his performance. Ramona and Scott kiss and sparks fly all around them. Gideon and Julie are caught, but Matthew offers to give the former CEO back his empire as long as he can keep his show, which he happily accepts. We see Scott and Ramona holding hands as they leave the theater. In the epilogue, we find that Sex Bomb Mom is back and they don't suck anymore since Knives officially joined the band. Ramona continues working as a stunt double, and the former League members start forming friendships with other people. Wallace travels to Paris, where he meets the love of his life. Ramona dyes her hair for the final time this season, as she meets up with Scott and their friends. The camera moves to capture the Toronto skyline, and all seems well. Unless, back behind the scenes in his secret lair, Gordon is back to scheming again, now with Julie by his side. So what do you think of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off and how it ended? Leave it in the comments, and if you enjoyed this recap, please like and subscribe for more. See you next time.